What's up, everybody? If you're new to the channel, my name's Eric Bruckman. I'm a masterclass shooter in both IDPA and USPSA, and today we're going to be walking through all of the most basic pistol shooting fundamentals and cues to look out for in your own training as you start ramping up your skill with a handgun. Let's jump right into it. Okay, so it goes without saying that all of the fundamentals we're going to be talking about here are important, but we're going to do this in order of what I think is generally more important to less important. And because of that, we're going to be starting with vision, because when we talk about grip, I could chop your hands off and you could probably still shoot a gun. I could chop your legs off and you would have no stance, but you could shoot from a wheelchair. But what you do need all the time, absolutely, to be able to put bullets where they need to go is your eyes. So with vision, we have a couple things that we need to consider, and they're pretty simple. You've probably heard these terms before. The first is your sight alignment. Now with iron sights, this is going to be different. Hey, do either of y'all have an iron sight gun here? Okay, so when we're talking about vision, there's two terms that I really want you to know. The first is sight alignment. So using this hand grenade, Sig Sauer P320 as an example, this SIG has iron sights. So the rear sight, like most other iron sighted handguns, is going to be a notch just like this, and then you have a front sight. And all you want to do is line up the top of the front sight with the top of the rear sight, and then you're going to perfectly place the front sight into the notch in the rear sight. Most people will refer to this as equal height, equal light, and I think that's a good phrase to help you remember what good sight alignment with an iron sighted gun is. With red dot sights, it's much simpler. All you have is this floating red dot. And that brings us to sight picture, which matters for both types of sighting systems. So when you have your sights aligned, now you can place those sights onto the spot on the target that you want to hit. And when you have both sight alignment and a good sight picture, that is when your sights are exactly where they need to be for you to take your shot. Now that you understand sight alignment and sight picture as principles, the next thing I want to talk about is where you should focus and whether or not to keep both eyes open. And we can address the latter by just saying, yes, generally you should be keeping both eyes open when you're shooting a handgun. Now there are some shooters who insist on only having one eye open. I know it feels weird at first if you're a new shooter, but try it and see how it works for you, and certainly give it a chance, because again, it takes some reps to really understand the benefits that keeping both eyes open gives for you. Now, with regards to where to focus, the same way that you can pull focus on a nice camera if you've ever played with one, you want to be focused on the target, especially with a red dot sight. The only time you'll really see a debate around where to focus is when iron-sighted shooters are talking about whether you should focus on a specific spot on the target or focus on the front sight. And you'll see a lot of shooters actually say they do both, where if they're shooting at a target that they're very comfortable with, they will opt to focus on that specific spot on the target. And then as the target gets more and more difficult, they will start to focus more on the front sight to ensure that they have as perfect of a sight alignment as they can. So that pretty much covers focus and your eyes. Now let's talk about levels of confirmation. Now this is a slightly more advanced topic, but frankly, this is all pretty simple, and the sooner you understand this concept, the better. So levels of confirmation is simply a phrase that people are using in the shooting space to talk about exploring how much confirmation, how perfect of a sight alignment and sight picture you can get away with to get the result you're looking for. So if I'm saying I want to shoot A-zone hits all the time, the speed at which I can do that and the amount of information I need from my eyes is different depending on how close or far away that target is. So if I was as close as I just was to that target, I probably don't even need to look at my sights at all. If you're that close, if you're at point blank range, we can all agree that you do not need a perfect sight picture with a stopped stable dot in order to get the hits that you're looking for, right? You can simply use the alignment of your body, the index of your arms, and then you'll need more and more confirmation as the distance of the target grows. Okay, so we've talked about vision enough at this point. Let's talk about trigger control next. And the reason I'm talking about trigger control second is because, frankly, all you need to put shots on target accurately is a quality sight picture and a trigger press that does not disturb where the gun is aimed as you pull the trigger. So whether you're shooting a Glock with a very sloppy trigger with lots of walls, and this wall that I'm referring to is where it stops right before the break, right? Or the super nice race gun with a much less pronounced wall. Let's get in focus, come on. There we go. Right? The principle remains the same. we need to break the trigger without disturbing the sights. So the way we do that is by one, placing our finger in a spot that is natural. So a lot of people will harp on, okay, where exactly do I need to place my finger on the trigger? And the answer to that is wherever feels most natural for you. I used to really be anal about, I'm always gonna have the middle of the pad of my finger on here and I'm gonna pull it straight back just like a lever. And that worked pretty well. But at this point, and with shooting more guns, I'm frankly not too concerned about that. And I just go by feel and put my finger on the trigger where it naturally kind of falls. A couple cues to look out for here as you're diagnosing, where your trigger finger should fall on the trigger. If you're a right-handed shooter and your shots are always kind of getting thrown off to the left as you're pulling the trigger, I would try putting more of your finger on the trigger, because you could be having so little finger on the trigger that you're kind of pushing the gun to the left. And then conversely, if you have too much of your finger on the trigger, you can start to kind of pull the gun off to the right. Now, if you're left-handed, all of this is going to flip for you. Experiment with this, see what works for you. But again, if you spend too much time thinking about this, you start to kind of major in the minors here, and it's better to just get the reps in and figure out what works best for you that way. Now, the last thing I'll talk about with trigger control is that the concept of levels of confirmation also applies to your trigger, right? So if you're shooting a very close-up target, the delicacy with which you pull the trigger matters way less, right? Because if you were to really slap that trigger and even move the gun a little bit, it's going to be okay, because you're probably still shooting A-zone hits or getting them wherever you need to get them, right? And then as that target gets further and further, you're probably going to want to prep up to the wall. For example, on a 25-yard partial, I'm not going to be slapping the crap out of that trigger. I'm probably going to get to the wall, make sure I still have a proper sight picture, and then I've taken all the slack out of the trigger, so there's much less room for the gun to move as I finally break the trigger. That's pretty much all there is to it. Play with this, see what you can get away with at what distances by really aggressively pulling the trigger to increase your times. Don't increase your times, decrease your times. There's a general theme here. You have to play with this stuff in your own training to figure out what works best for you. I'm only providing you with the cues and things to look out for as you're doing the work yourself. The next principle up on the list is grip. Now, a lot of people will say that grip is the most important shooting skill, and I wouldn't disagree with them. I think there's a very strong case for vision, but grip is incredibly important. And again, to be accurate, all you need is a good sight alignment, good sight picture, and a trigger press that doesn't disturb where the gun is aimed. But if you want to do all of that fast, you have to have a grip that is repeatable and creates consistent behavior when the gun recoils. First off, you want to get your firing hand as high as possible onto the gun, right? So there should be no gap between the webbing, between my thumb and index finger, and the top of the grip. We want to totally close all that space, right? And then what we want to do is make sure that our middle finger is connecting to the bottom of the trigger guard. So if there's a gap here, that's also a problem. So take that up. And then finally, get your thumb out of the way to make room for your support hand to come and fill all of this empty space. So come just like that. Your index finger on your left hand should come right into this corner, so it's not too low like that. And then you also want to not cross your thumbs and have them chase each other like little racehorses. Ha ha ha, that's probably weird to you, but that's the way I think about it. So again, take up all this empty space. I like to almost like karate chop into this corner. That's a good index point for me. And then from here, I'm going to take my fingertips, kind of pull, and then just wrap the rest of my hand around, taking up all that empty space. So there should really be no gap between my two hands. If there's a gap like this, that's probably an issue, right? And then the last thing I want to note here is if you have a gun with a big manual safety like this gun does, you want to make sure that the thumb of your firing hand sits above it, because when you fire the gun and it recoils and your thumb is under it, you'll do exactly what I just did there, which is as the gun comes back down in recoil, you can flick the safety up, and when you go to pull the trigger again, you will not be able to. So definitely watch out for that. Let that firing hand thumb ride over the manual safety, and then again, just like with the Glock, we're going to take up all the empty space, have our index finger in the corner here, bam, just like so. The other way of gripping the gun that you'll see a lot of people do is they'll wrap their index finger around the front of their trigger guard like this. You'll see smaller framed individuals and people with super large hands alike do this for different reasons. Now, I shoot guns that have flashlights on them and stuff like that, so for the sake of consistency, I really enjoy just gripping like this. You're not losing anything by having this style of grip compared to that style of grip with your index finger on the trigger guard. That's a totally personal preference thing. Okay, now that you know where to put your hands, you should have a good starting point for a decent grip. Now past that, there are 3 things that I use to measure how good a grip is when we're shooting. So those 3 things are the repeatability of the grip, right? So how consistently am I coming out of the holster and building the exact same grip every single time, right? Because if I draw the gun one time and I'm like this and there's a big gap here, or if I draw the gun another time and my firing hand is super low like this looks terrible, right? That's not good. So our grip needs to be super repeatable, and that's gonna come through dry fire reps. The next thing I'm looking for is the durability of the grip. So if I'm shooting a longer string of fire and my hands start to move as I'm shooting, and I have to adjust my grip every couple shots because it's starting to slip off the gun, that's an issue. So you need to make sure that the grip is both repeatable and durable. And then the final thing we're looking for is predictable or consistent, right? And what that means is I want consistent behavior through the sights, whether I'm coming up and to the right a little bit, but it's happening the same way every time, or if I'm coming perfectly up and down at 12 o'clock, whatever's happening, I just want it to be consistent, because if I create consistent behavior with my grip, then I'm going to be able to shoot much faster and much more confidently because I can predict how the sights are going to behave as I'm shooting the gun faster. So to put a bow on grip, put your hands in the right places. We've already talked about that. And then focus in your training on creating a grip that is repeatable, durable, and creates consistent behavior as you're shooting. If you can do all 3 of those things, you'll be in a really good spot with your grip. The 4th thing we're going to talk about is stance. Now, again, you can be a pretty good shooter with just vision, trigger control, and grip. Just to demonstrate this, again, you do not need a perfect stance to shoot accurately. Right? You just need a good sight picture and a trigger pull that does not disturb the sights. So with stance, the 2 things we're really looking for is the extra bit of structure that it's going to give us. So just like grip, the extra structure from stance is going to allow our sights to return to where we want them to be faster and allow us to shoot faster because of that. And then also it's going to prime us for explosive athletic movement as we are shooting and moving. So whether you're a tactical person who's doing this for their ability to be violent, or you're doing this to play the USPSA game, either way, being able to shoot and move aggressively is very important. So if I were to stand like a nerd, and we've got a clean target in front of us, and I start to shoot fast, and I have a decent grip, we're gonna get an okay result because we're pretty close, but you're gonna watch this second hit kind of track high. There's probably gonna be like 2 piles of hits, but we'll see what happens. Again, very narrow stance. I'm straight up and down. My weight is on my heels. This is not what I would consider to be a good stance. And when we shoot fast like that, even though it's 9mm, you can see I'm getting thrown around by the gun a little bit. And look at that, 4 pairs, 4 shots here, 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are all my first shot from the pair. And then here up top, we have 1, 2, 3, and a miss right here. You can see just barely touching the cardboard there. So even if we have a decent grip, and I'm still kind of recovering from this hand injury, but regardless, if your stance isn't there, you're doing yourself a disservice. So let's tape this target up so you can see a fresh one. Okay, clean target. Now let's have a better stance, one where we have a bit more structure behind the gun and we're ready to move. So again, instead of being super tall like this, very narrow, I'm going to spread my feet out. I'm going to bend my legs just a little bit. I'm going to drop my rear end, almost like I'm a fighter or a football player. And then one cue that I got that really helped me, this came from Drew Estel at his rifle class, was to spread the ground with my feet, right? So I'm just putting just a little bit of pressure on the outside, and that just made me feel way more locked in than the way I was standing before. So I love doing this. And then I'm leaning just a little bit forward so my shoulders are in front of my hips. If I'm the other way around, you'll see a lot of people do this. That's when they really start to get thrown around by the gun as well. So shoulders in front of hips. I'm not an Instagram model, so I'm not too far. Let's see what happens here. So even with a super sloppy grip, because this hand is still hurting, we are shooting all A-zone hits about as fast as we can pull the trigger. And of course, all these ones that are out here, those are still the second shot. Yeah, they're tracking high, but you can see we shrunk our accuracy cone by about 100%. This is half as big as it was beforehand. And then if you're talking about points for the sake of the sport, this is Charlies, Deltas, a mic, and then here we have all alphas. So this stuff matters, right? Your stance matters. The other reason your stance matters is movement. So let's talk about this now. And I think the guys are shooting a stage, so this is the perfect opportunity for that. Okay, the final principle we're going to be talking about is movement. Now, movement could be its own series of videos, so we're going to only cover it super briefly here. I'll give you a couple cues to look out for as you're talking about shooting and moving or shooting on the move. So again, if you have a good stance, that's going to allow you to get out of position much sooner. The things you really need to focus on are shooting sooner, not faster, and you can do that by making your entries a lot smoother. Right? As you're coming into a position, I want you to drop your rear end and decelerate way before you actually get to the spot where you're going to be shooting from. If you have your gun up and you're coming around a corner like that, shooting sooner is always going to save you more time than crashing into a position, feeling fast, but not actually being fast, and then trying to hose all the rounds from an unstable position, right? So make sure you settle in on your entries. With your exits, a good stance, like I said, is going to load you up and allow you to get out of position. I'm really only going to drop step if I'm leaned like this, because I find that taking that drop step to get out of position does actually help when your weight is all the way on one foot from a big lean. But if you don't have to lean, don't lean, and then you can be loaded and move out of position without taking extra steps. And then the final thing is when you're shooting on the move, you're gonna find this again in your own training, but you wanna drop your butt ever so slightly, and instead of crashing with your feet, if you just look at where my hands are at, boom, 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 if you get a little bit lower and roll your feet, and you bend your elbows ever so slightly, you will have pretty much what's essentially a suspension system, keeping your eyes and the gun level and allowing you to shoot better. One more note about your movement. If you're doing a short movement, it's going to be much faster for you to maintain your two-handed grip. This is called mounted movement, right? You're mounted on the gun versus breaking your grip and going to an unmounted movement. That's because building your grip all over again takes, X amount of time. And if you don't have to do that in order to move as efficiently as possible, then don't do that. Now, if you're moving for something much longer, like anything more than, 7, 10-ish yards, it's probably gonna be good for you to break your grip so you can actually run like an athlete. Of course, keeping the muzzle in a safe direction the entire time. And that pretty much wraps us up for this video. Again, this is meant to be a super high-level overview of the principles of pistol shooting. Most of the nuances and tricks that you're gonna hear about are all things that you're going to figure out on your own. Some of them that other people will tell you may apply to you, some of them may not, and it's better for you to just go ahead and put the work in yourself. Thank you guys for all the love lately. The channel just keeps growing, and it's because of y'all for tuning in. As always, thank you for watching, and I hope this video made you a better marksman.